Welcome back to another episode of the Deer Gear Podcast. I'm your host, Cameron Durr, and today is part 2 of breaking down the scientific arrow process with Tony Warden and Dorge. This episode, the data has been released, so if you go to wardensoutdoor.com, you can follow along with the graphs that we are breaking down. We're talking about what Tony has found testing different arrow shafts from different manufacturers, for weight variance, speed deprivation, and much more. It's a really good conversation, and a lot of it backs up what we have been talking about on this podcast with Dorge for a really long time. If you don't want to hear it from Dorge or you don't want to hear it from me, here it is from Tony Warden breaking down the scientific arrow process, what is going to be the best way to build an arrow, what are the best components you can use, what are the best shafts you can use. So here it is, part 2. Hope you guys enjoy it. Before we get into that episode, guys, huge cold front coming in throughout the Midwest. Hope you guys are capitalizing on that. Make sure you're going to the Exodus YouTube channel and consuming all the great content that we have around hunting the month of October, hunting cold fronts. And there's some really great one-off videos from Steve Shirk breaking down his annual data from the last 2 years. It's really good information. So if you're trying to key in on some dates throughout October, maybe you're setting up a vacation or maybe you're just trying to plan out some hunts, go check those videos out. You won't want to miss them. With that being said, let's get into this podcast with Tony Warden. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Deer Gear Podcast. Previously, you heard Dorge and I were joined by Mr. Tony Warden, and you saw the accolades, you heard the testing that was going to be done, and now the website is published, the data is published, and we're going to get into some hard facts. We're going to talk about what Tony was able to find, and I'm pretty excited for this. I remember last time, the conversation left me wanting more. I was like, okay, this is a super awesome test. Tony, thank you for putting so much time into it. But let's talk about some results now. I'm more of a show me, don't tell me type of guy, and that's what I base the podcast off of. So I'm excited to learn about how the testing went down and what you found. How are you doing today, Tony?
I'm doing very well, Cameron. This has kind of been a frustrating labor of love. This is just part 1 of 3 parts, and just a little teaser. Part 2 is about 75% done already. Ooh. That's where I'm mixing and matching different arrows or shafts with components and that sort of stuff. So I just got a couple of more companies to run through. Hopefully I'll have at least one new company will be participating in phase 2. So that's a little carrot for you. Probably by the end of October, it'll all be ready to go.
Oh, wow. That's pretty quick. Did phase 2 take longer or shorter than the first test?
Shorter, actually.
Yeah. I'm sure after you had the infrastructure and everything laid out, you already had the arrows.
Exactly. And what took a long time was actually building the arrows and then, putting them on a spreadsheet for each of, it's not an individual arrow that I've shot. All of these are groups of 3 arrows. Okay. So when you look at any of my charts, you may think it's just, one, say, sport weave concept 1.0 with arrow vein 2. Okay. But it's actually, I built 3 of them, shot and recorded all 3 shots and took the averages from them. So that kind of, I tried to eliminate some of the outliers or flyers, as you would call it, that you just go, what the heck? But there still are some on here when you take a look at it. There's a couple of things that kind of surprised me a bit in here. So fire away.
Well, let's, Dorge, first, how are you doing today?
Yes, sir. I'm doing quite well. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're good. We're rocking.
Okay, good. Beautiful. Yeah, because all of a sudden, I got really quiet on my end. Well, the first thing I want to make sure everybody know is called Warden, WARDNS outdoors.com. Tony was very kind to use one of his old website he have and put everything there. So if people want to see it, it is WARDNSOUTDORS.com. All the data are there. It's quite, I mean, being a guy with science, I love charts. And I love I develop how to read them. I know most people, unlike me, will not be able to look at, say, 2-3 million lines of spreadsheets and find out what's wrong. But I'm good with that. I'm really, really good with that. Well, first of all, I'm really, really impressed on a lot of things. And then pretty much what Tony did is confirmed everything I said, but I just didn't expect some cases, the numbers are that dramatic. I know they are different, but I didn't expect that kind of dramatic, and pretty much confirmed everything I said on every single graph. So I'm interested that, Tony going to go into it, and then when times they come by, I would jump in and try to use what I believe is correct, and then try to explain why the chart show like that. I think that would be the best place for me to jump in. What do you think, Cameron?
Yeah, I think that works. Tony, it's probably going to be easiest for you to take it from where you want to start with it. It's your data, it's your testing. I don't want to jump around a little bit. I'd rather just go in sequential order, and we can talk about the data as it makes sense to talk about it. And it's your data. So, Dorge, go ahead.
I think the best thing to do for the customer who finally start listening to this podcast, they should jump to Tony's WardenOutdoors.com and actually print those graphs out and listen to this podcast, because a lot of time when we talk, things won't make any sense unless they got a graph in front of them,
Sure.
Which is unfortunate at this moment. But the fortunate is it's going to be published a little bit later. And then when you have time, you need to sort of like go to Warden's Outdoors and print those graphs in your hand. And when you listen to this, so I know a lot of customers tell me they sort of like to listen to the podcast when they are driving or listening on big rigs, which is what they mostly do. I think they can listen to it, but later they need to go to the website and look at those charts, because the beautiful things about charts are they give you overall like a 10,000 meter view of what the data is look like.
Sure.
Just like you can't stand on the ground and say, "Oh, look at the coastline," where you're in the middle of Illinois. You need to be up 10,000 feet or 20,000 or sitting on the boat and look down. Then you see, look at those coastlines. That's pretty much how I see it.
I agree. Yeah, that's a great point. So if you are listening to this and you are thinking that you really want to study this data as well, it is best case to go to the website and take a look at the graphs or print them out, or however you need to do it. Again, it's Warden's, WARDENS outdoor, no S, wardensoutdoor.com. And all this data is laid out there. So Tony, take it away.
Okay. Basically what I did when I put the website on is I did everything in order, like in its proper order. So easiest thing for us to do is just click on, let's start with arrow speed loss graph 1. Everybody can, kind of read the introduction and what equipment I've used. That's just standard. But if we go starting on, would be what, 1, 2, 3, page 4, arrow speed loss graph 1. This is the speed loss at distances by the manufacturers. Okay. Now, before we get into any of the numbers, you can see in red up at the top of the graph, interpolate 70 to 100 yards. That's a fancy way of saying I used a calculation, a computer generated calculation to project what the speed loss would be from 70 to 100 yards, which basically what that does is it takes the necessity of me having to shoot another 1,000 arrows basically to get the distances from 70 to 100 yards. It's a reasonably accurate graph. I mean, we may be out 0.1% from actual results, but for people like the ones out in Western North America who shoot pronghorns at 100 yards or 150 yards with their speed demon crossbows, this will give you a little bit of an idea of what you can look at. So like Dorge said, it's kind of what we expected. The outlier is there's two of them. On the good side, the plus side, is the Firenock built arrows. Okay, that's your sport weave, your arrow weave, using, I coined the term scientific arrow process. Okay, which that's explained in the introduction. It's a modern way of building arrows. Okay, and you'll see in some of the other graphs, there is a huge difference between the way people made arrows for the last 100 years and this new way of doing it. And that's kind of something, to be honest, that surprised me. When you look at the archery industry, or pretty much any industry, there's been such huge technological advantages or advances over the years, but not really so much in how you put an arrow together. I started building arrows in around, 1968 to 1970. And most shops, I'd say 95% of the shops, still build them the exact same way today. And that's not necessarily because it's the best way of doing it. The scientific arrow process that actually Dorge came up with, along with the jig and everything, is just, there's a huge difference, and it's the evolution or the next step in making and building an arrow. So that's why, going back to the first graph, that's why you see Firenock having the absolute least amount of speed loss compared to all the other companies. The other outlier on the back end is your Raven broadheads. They start out really, like better than all the others, but as soon as you come out to around 50 yards or so, it just drops off almost right off of the chart. Your other companies, they're just kind of middle of the road, standard built arrows. So the only one that's really kind of cool is your gold tip, which is the green one. It's just basically a perfectly straight line from 0 down to, negative, what's that, 1775 roughly.
Yep.
So otherwise, they all follow a very, very similar curve.
Yeah, that this graph is really interesting to me, and it's something that explains why what Dorge talks about all the time with sight tapes is true with his arrow builds, because you can see the average, which starts out at 0, obviously, and then let's just use 60 yards for example. Not many shots are happening past 60 yards, and at 60 yards, the average is lost about 10%, a little less than 10%. At 60 yards, the Firenock is at 9%, which is, it's 1%, but 1% of the speed that you have at that range could be a substantial number. And then after that, it's just like the average speed deprivation is so much greater than the Firenock, which is why what Dorge says, you can't use a sight tape for most of the arrow builds past 40, 50, 60 yards. That's why that is.
And the other thing, I know I'm kind of, excuse me, I'm kind of jumping ahead a bit, but when you look at the kinetic energy, that's the hitting power of an arrow.
Sure.
That's where that 1% is going to make a big difference. Yep. Okay, and how hard an arrow hits a target at each distance. So do you have any questions on this chart? Either you or Dorge. I know Dorge says they're pretty much exactly what he expected, but if you have any questions for me on this, feel free, or we're going to flip over to the second graph.
Well, I just want to point out a lot of people see that's the reason I tell everybody when it doesn't matter what arrow you use. If you're only shooting around your first 20, 30 yards, it doesn't matter what you actually use. And just like it's especially like if you're really into a design of an arrow, if you want an arrow to have absolute maximum speed, you want the absolute simplest form of arrow you can possibly make that will give you what you need. I mean, it's just like one of my customers will come to me and the only thing he care about is how close is sight tape or inside his scope number is to what the scope number need to be. I say, if that is what you want, you can't use any of my stuff and you want the absolute lightest arrow you can get away with. Exactly. But then the speed and everything will match all the way out. But unfortunately, the KE don't. So he said, yeah, I can shoot 100 yards. But at that moment, his so-called 480 feet per second, which is supposed to be 160-pound KE, was dropped down to the power of a compound bow.
If you're not a lightweight compound bow.
Correct. And everything he asks, say, oh, I have all the power I need. At 100 yards, say not 100 yards. For the 20, 30 yards, absolutely. You are absolutely correct. But then that makes a lot of people very uncomfortable. Because see, everybody out there, like a lot of my more educated customer, the first thing I always tell you, I ask you is that you want your arrow best perform at what yardage? That's the first thing I always ask. Because if you do not have that defined, and like 90% of the customer who are only chasing the initial number, your launch speed, then you're better off buying the cheapest arrow you can get with the strictest arrow property. Then you are absolutely correct in that. But at longer distance, everything you ask for is exactly the opposite.
I think a lot of these graphs and this whole website really, I don't want to be rude, but they're not for the archer that goes out, shoots a deer at 15 to 20 yards, maybe practices 20 minutes to make sure his 20-yard pin is on. That's really not, who this website is for. Sure. I mean, like for myself, my average distance for, taking down game with a compound bow is 48 yards. And with a crossbow, it's actually 70 yards. And, I'm a former professional archer. Okay. And it's just like my groups, to me, if I can't be within a 2-inch group at 60, 70, 80 yards, that's like the maximum for me. But then there's other people like my father, who's passed away, by the way, but he was happy with a 6-inch group because he says, close enough to kill a deer, Yeah, it's all relative to not only how good of an archer you are, but how comfortable you are shooting at those distances. I mean, like Dorge was talking about one area that he's going to be hunting in. His average shot out there is like 60 to 70 yards. Those kind of areas, most people don't go, but here we go. We've got the data for those people, those type of experienced archers that can do this.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, the typical average whitetail hunter, this stuff is it is a little bit above what most people will consider interesting, but I am fascinated by it, and I know a lot of other guys are fascinated by it, and obviously you are too. That's why you went through all the testing to do this.
Exactly. The other thing is too, I've always said to people, okay, your bait is out at 15 yards.
Yep.
Okay. What happens if a buck of a lifetime comes out at 50 or 60 yards? You need the equipment and the skill to either be able to shoot that, or you're going to have to let that deer walk away, your record book
100%.
deer. Or on the other hand, too, if you have a deer that's 15 yards away, however, you only have an opening of about 4 inches in between the brush. When it steps there, you've got a perfect double lung shot. You want to have the equipment to be able to thread the needle and hit that. And I've actually done that before. I've had other archers come up when I show them where I shot and, where I put the shot and after we got the deer and everything. And they're like, how the heck did you get an arrow through that? It was a 2-inch area. But that comes with A, practice, and B, great products, great equipment. That always get the best equipment you can and practice as far out as you can possibly hit accurately so that it gives you the confidence, even if you're only shooting 15 or 20 yards. Always extend your range a bit if you can.
Agreed. I couldn't add to that anymore. There was I don't know. I think it was 3 years ago. I was like really getting into archery and I would start my practice at 60 yards. I wouldn't warm up at 20, 30, 40, or 50. I would start shooting at 60 yards. And then when I got back to the hunting distances at 20 and 30 yards, it was like the target looked like a watermelon. It was huge. I felt like I was so much more confident in that. But
Exactly.
let's move on to the
Okay.
next graph here.
The next graph is the arrow speed loss by fletching type. Okay. This again, it's kind of an obvious one. The fire arrow vein 2s, they have the least speed percentage decrease. But the thing that surprises me, look at that blue line.
Yeah.
That's Boning's brand new this year heat veins. That's their target vein. And when I talk to the people at Boning about doing this, and like I've got permission from all of these companies to use their products, they specifically said, please don't just do our X veins, use our heat veins too. We want to show how they perform. And I think they're kind of regretting that because they're the worst performing veins out of all of them.
Not even by a little bit, like by far.
No, we're talking 19, 22 years, 3-4% difference in your speed loss with those veins. It kind of makes sense too when you look at the arrow vein 3. Once you get out quite a ways, don't forget those arrows are spinning a lot. Okay, like I don't know, what is it, 15 times more than
no arrow vein 3 is at 350 feet per second. Is spinning 30 to 35 times more. That's the reason. Those numbers are mind-boggling, but you can't argue with slow speed, high speed camera and film because I can't fake those.
But when you look at what most people would be doing and shooting 40 yards or under, they're very, very stable, and even out at, 100 yards, they're extremely stable, both the arrow vein 3 and the arrow vein 2. Personally, I hunt with the arrow vein 2. But I do know a lot of people that shoot the arrow vein 3 in their super fast crossbows, 350, 400 foot per second crossbows. You can't beat the arrow vein 3 on those. And then your others, again, they're just within a nice tight range, it's almost down to personal preference at that point, or who you can convince to sponsor you and give you free.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I know you didn't test for it, but did you notice shooting any of the other veins, a noise difference?
Unfortunately, I'm partially deaf.
Oh, well, not the guy to ask.
No. If I use my hearing aids, I can hear fairly well, but all I hear is the bow when it shoots.
Sure.
I don't hear the arrow whatsoever in flight. Now, just a little tidbit about hearing stuff in that. The lab radar unit, which runs off of Doppler radar, sound waves, can't even pick up a shot out of my hunting bow.
Huh.
Okay. I've got the Gearhead T24, but then true to form, Dorge put titanium on the whole thing. All the fasteners and everything's titanium. And it is so quiet. The only thing you hear is the click of the release when it goes off. So the Doppler radar could not pick that up at all. So I couldn't even use my own hunting bow to shoot this.
Well, that might be a good thing that you weren't able to use that bow, because most of the people that may be interested in this data might not have the titanium kit, which will increase efficiency and stuff. So that might be a good thing that you weren't able to use that bow.
Exactly. This is what I used was basically stock what you would buy off the shelf.
Yep.
Okay. I didn't do any tweaks. I didn't restring them or make new cables my way or anything like that. They were all just stock. I used a stock biscuit type, whisker biscuit type arrow rest on it because it's so popular in that, which I should explain, I believe slows your arrow down a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it's got to go through all those plastic quills.
Whiskers. Yeah.
Honestly, I'm not a big fan of those, but that's what I used. Everything was stock.
Well, that's good. Man, that chart it's not surprising to me at all. I mean, the boning heat vein is like,
that's the surprise right there.
It's a big outlier. Everything else is fairly similar. When you look at let's look at that 60-yard mark again. Just use the Blazer vein because that's a super popular vein. At 60 yards here, we have an average speed loss at like 10 and a quarter.
Right.
Compared to the Aerovane 2, it's about 8 and a quarter. So if you're shooting the Exodus MMT arrows fletched with Aerovane 2, you're going to be really, really happy to see this chart. And I know Dorge is, and I know I am too.
Well, you can't argue with science. I mean, the fact is that the moment you use aerodynamics, I mean, to be frank with you, that's reason a lot of people have forgotten. When you start shooting about 240 feet per second and below, everything works.
Yeah.
That's the reason if you like some other people say they bought the biggest bow and they say it's so easy to shoot. When you only want to shoot 200 to 240 feet per second, everything is easy to shoot. It's not just your new bow.
That's true. That's true.
Sorry, I just want to rub it in a little bit.
All right. You want to go on to graph 3?
Yes, sir.
All right. This is by building style, arrow speed loss by building style. And when I say that, I broke it down to 4 things. The standard, we've been doing this for 100, 150 years type of way. Dorge's concept 1.0 and 2.0, and then the scientific arrow process, what I consider the new modern way to build an arrow. And you can see like concept 1 and 2, they run just about perfectly parallel with each other. Now, one little thing about that, don't forget the concept 1.0 and 2.0, they are made with the scientific arrow process. Okay. It's a full process that you have to go through. But if you take and just use regular arrows, okay, that haven't been put into the concept systems, just look at the blue line and the black line, and you can see even at 40 yards, there's a lot of difference in between the two ways of making your arrows. I put in this website, if anybody wants to learn how to do the scientific arrow process, they can drop me a line. I'm sure they can drop you or Dorge a line. I know from what Dorge has been saying, you don't actually have to be a dealer to be able to use this process and use his equipment. So to me, if you're building arrows for clients, you've got to work with this system. It's a lot more accurate way of building an arrow.
Yeah, I'll save all the listeners a bunch of money too. If you want arrows built by the scientific arrow process, go to exodusoutdoorgear.com and order them right there.
I did not know you were going to do that. I into that, but I didn't know that.
Well, but let's put it this way: that the people need to look at Firenock history. Okay, we did not come out to build arrows. We built components for every single person. But when Exodus asked me to go help, it made my life so much easier, because all my inserts and stuff like that, just like for example, I don't know whether the customer remembered or our listener remembered, when I built a 204 insert, my stock 204 insert had to fit between a 202 and all the way to a 2065. But the one I built for Exodus only had to fit 246 exactly. You know how much easier that is?
Precise.
You love doing this sort of stuff, Dorge. Don't let any of the listeners get fooled. You love being able to create these things. That's your passion.
That's true. I love to create exactly what everybody needs, but when you have so much variation for everybody, it's not easy. Trust me. Just like which dealer would not like to stock one item and one item only and sell everything? And which is also, I mean, if you are into red vertical bow, like the old PSC bows, why do you think PSC love to use marks except cam? Because marks are much so easier to work with. But if you want absolute precision or everything out, you have to make drawing specific cams. Yes, everything is more precise if you only want to do one thing.
Exactly, but there's all sorts of different archers, and everybody has their own favorites, their own what they want and what they need to use. So you got to provide it. How many products do you make now?
Just under 800.
800. Wow. And that's basically just put together arrows and bowstrings and that sort of stuff. It's pretty amazing. Anyhow, arrow weight graph number 1. When you look at this, this is very, very self-explanatory. When you look at 5 out of the 6 of these manufacturers, there's not a substantial difference in their weight. The 6th one, it's I don't want to insult the people at Element, but to me they're not a top quality company. Okay, they're more like go to Walmart and grab a set. If I have insulted Element, I apologize. But that's just my own personal opinion. but when you look at, take the element, which is about 1.9% difference in the weight of your arrow. On a 400 grain arrow, that's 7.6 grains. If you're shooting out past 20 yards, 7.6 grains is a heck of a lot of variance. You are not going to get good groups with that. I just, yeah, hi, Dorge, go ahead.
Well, I want to point out, okay, weight difference per dozen arrow is really a very simple process. Let me just be blunt. When we in Firenock, when we make say a 246 arrows, from the beginning of the lot to the end of the lot, we should expect about 12 grain difference per entire lot, which is more than acceptable. Now the question is, what do you do with it?
Right.
Like if you've seen, I learned this from GoTip. He said when I was with Marvin Carlson, he told me, "Oh, that's easy. No, most customer is not going to need more than 12." So every one of the GoTip arrow in the old days got a tiny stickers on it. The sticker will tell you what's the weight of that dozen arrow. So when you buy multiple GoTip arrow, you make sure that every one of the sticker is the same. So the entire arrow is the same.
Sure.
But now the question is that how much company want to put in the effort of making it the same? Like right now in Firenock, our arrows are pre-sorted from the factory within not plus and minus 1, it's 1 grain. That means it's plus 0.5 minus 0.5 is what you end up with 1. Because plus and minus 1 grain is 2 grains.
Right.
A lot of people forgot about that. So the question is that, are they willing to put the time to sort it? Or are they just going to grab 12 arrow, put in a bundle and send it?
No, one thing, Dorge, you said per lot. Let the listeners know how many arrows are in a lot. We're not talking 2 or 3 dozen arrows.
No, a lot for us is at least 2,000 arrows. So that, inside the lot, for example, like I'm dealing with, say, if I build arrow with a target weight of 210, I should expect a less as 202 all the way to 218. That's what the lot is. Okay. Then I sort all the lots, say, in 1 grain increment, and then bundle them with a sticker on it and say, this bundle of arrow you got is 200 and say 11 grain. So each arrow is plus and minus half grain. That's what the bundle is. But then if you buy multiple bundles, the first thing you need to recognize is that what you bought last year and what you bought this year, unless you specify the specific way the bundle is going to be off, it's always going to be. It's not just me, it's everybody. So when people tell you this is 8.1 grain per inch, that's an average of the bundled lot that they are targeted to produce. I think people forgot that one thing. When you make arrow, there's so many variations. Just temperature and moisture alone can change it. So what you buy this year on a brand of specific arrow, next year you buy them, they are not the same. They can't be.
Now you can, if you're building your own arrows, customizing them, you can take a little bit off of one arrow, to get them closer.
Oh, absolutely.
I did not do that for this testing. Normally, when I build arrows for myself, or I will, if I'm out 1 grain, I'm unhappy. Okay, but for these, I cut them all the exact same length. Every one of these arrows and every one of the bolts, they're the exact same length. Okay. That's the only way that I was able to come up with a chart like this that says, you're within 0.2 of 1% in the weight. Otherwise everybody'd be 0 if I, took the time.
No, I fully agree with that. And what you're trying to show people is that based on the how far a company willing to go when they pre-sort the equipment. Exactly. I mean, it's like me. I mean, when I do my fuel points, they are all plus and minus 0.5 grain, so it's plus and minus 1 grain. But just like the dagger broadhead we have when me and Cameron was doing the podcast, told them those are high pressure die cast. When they come up with, if I peel 1,000 of the 125, I would lucky get 200 to 250 of the 125 all of them are below and over. That's exactly what's going on here.
Exactly.
It's the sorting process because you cannot possibly overcome it unless you go to a very unified component-based system, like very much like what I call it, like a min dagger. Well, everyone is going to be the same because the process is 100% identical. I mean, if you want to control 1850 degrees Fahrenheit, otherwise it won't melt. So you know the temperature is about as consistent as it gets. Your pressure has to be. So if everything is even, well, guess what? The result is even.
How about you, Cam? Any questions on this graph? I know Dorge and I kind of just took over on this.
No, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. I think we can move on to the kinetic energy graphs.
Sounds good. Now we're getting into how hard these things hit. Okay. The first one is just by manufacturer. They're all just clumped in together. All your, Firenock concept ones, Firenock concept twos, all the Black Eagles. It doesn't matter whether they're the PS23s down to their 166. I think it's their Deep Impact LTs or X Impact LTs. They're all just grouped together. And when you look at it, really, it kind of makes sense that they're going to be fairly similar since they're all the same weight, You've got some decent hitting power. There is kind of a strange one in Gold Tip where it starts out the same as everybody else, then, it takes a dive. You lose some percentage when you're at the 30 to 60 yards, which is kind of a critical area for a lot of archers.
Yep.
You lose some kinetic energy, some hitting power, but then it catches up, and actually at the end, the numbers suggest that they're the best arrow to shoot at, 100 yards.
Yep.
And if you want to go for accuracy and consistency, you're looking at your concept ones, Black Eagle, they're a little bit lower than the average, but then you've got, your Carbon Tech, your Eastons, they're all, basically they're all hitting relatively the same.
Yeah, the only thing there's only a couple outliers. I mean, you have, like you mentioned, the Gold Tip, Firenock Concept 1.0 kind of starts out of the gate a little bit higher than everyone else until you get to that 30-yard mark, and then it's kind of back in line with everyone. And then Element's kind of average, and then boom, just takes a dipsy dive once you hit the 45-yard mark.
Yeah. Again, that could be because of the weight variance differences. If you've got, something that's 2% weight difference, you can see, at 60 yards, that makes, 3-4% kinetic energy drop.
Yep.
That's your hitting power. Just here's a reference. For a grizzly bear, to hunt grizzly bears, the common thing is you need 65 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Okay. And that's basically, you want that coming right out your bow. When you use your Concept 1 and Concept 2.0, you're usually, if you're shooting 70 pounds, you're usually out at 65 yards. You're still at about 65 foot-pounds of kinetic energy.
Sure.
So that's something that you have to look at. What are you hunting? And you always want, again, to have the hardest hitting, because, I took several years ago, I took a deer with a tomahawk broadhead, which 150 grains, I guess,
175.
175 grains.
Mhm.
And I was shooting a scorpid crossbow. And when I shot this deer, double lung shot, the deer staggered sideways about 3 yards because it hit it so hard. And you want some power behind you. It doesn't have to be that crazy. Okay. I like to, as you can tell, I like to experiment with stuff. But that hitting something and making it stagger sideways is a pretty cool thing.
I would like to see that.
Unfortunately, that was before I was doing any type of video in that. But again, I shot my record book black bear in Northern Ontario a couple of years ago, and it went 10 feet.
Jeez.
Yeah, and that's out of a compound bow. That wasn't out of a crossbow. That was out of a 70-pound, my T24. Of course, I was using the dagger arrows and a Concept 1.0. To me, that is the absolute ultimate compound bow setup. I do have this some swing blades. They're great. I use those on a crossbow, but for my compound bow, I just love the way those daggers hit. I've shot almost every broadhead that's been put out there. And yeah, these things are amazing.
So speaking of crossbows, this is going to jump us into the next graph. I'm not a crossbow guy. I'll put that out there. I've never shot one. I don't pay much attention to them, but this kinetic energy graph with the crossbow bolts is just silly.
Yeah, this is kinetic energy graph number 2. That if you want to look at the Firenock Concept 1.0, that is exactly what Dorge says. It's doing exactly what he says in there. Another big seller is your Black Eagle executioners. They're the second best. Okay. And then I don't know, honestly, who makes the Raven bolts and arrows, but the way they perform, and we're talking out of a R10. I mean, the performance isn't what I thought it would be for those arrows, especially since they say that you're supposed to only shoot their arrows. If you're gonna have a captive audience like that, you've got to put out something a little bit better, guys. I'm sorry. I know a couple of guys at Raven, and I know a couple of guys at virtually every manufacturing, arrow manufacturer or archery manufacturers, actually. Yeah, that's tough to see. You got your element. Okay, they're your department store type bolts and arrows, but yeah, that is a crazy looking graph.
Yeah, I mean, after 50 yards, well, let's say 50 yards, the Firenock Concept 1.0 almost straightens out.
Exactly. From 50 to 100 yards, you are only losing, what's that?
3%.
50, yeah, about 3% kinetic energy, 3% hitting power.
Compared to the Raven losing, let's say 13% to 30%.
Yeah.
3% to 30%. That's just a silly graph. You look at it and you're like, there's no way.
And, they say you got to look at these graphs and realize, well, there's going to be some slight differences when I'm shooting,
Sure.
which may be possible, but when I'm shooting the compound bows, I'm pulling right to the stops, after 50 some years of shooting, I'm pretty consistent. But when you're looking at crossbow bolts, all I'm doing is squeezing a trigger, guys. So there's really no user error in these, shall we say?
Yeah. I think that's fair. We're getting close to the end here. We can skip over standard deviation number 1 because that's just the arrow weight standard deviation by company.
Yeah.
And we kind of talked about everyone was kind of on the same par there.
Mhm.
And I mean, there are Sport Weave, Arrow Bolt, and Easton have a much better standard deviation than the conglomerate there. But I think the more interesting stuff happens on standard deviation number 2 and 3.
Exactly. That one I took pretty much all the different arrows that I'm shooting and bolts. And that one I plotted on, and again, standard deviation just says how close to perfect they are, I guess is what you would say. I used an online calculator, the same one for all of these as well. It's a fairly long mathematical formula that you have to use, and I'm just too lazy to do that anymore. But if you look at things, your arrow bolt with the concept 1.0 has a 0 standard deviation.
Which and like anything scientific, like you almost say can't happen.
Exactly.
Like if you have a standard deviation of 0, you automatically assume that the test is flawed because you're like, how is that even possible?
These are maybe Dorge can explain it better than I can, but these are built with not the Sport Weave, but the Arrow Weave, which is the premium arrow that Dorge does. I did not build those arrows. Dorge built them. They were like virtually 0 weight differences. The tolerances were basically perfect. But I mean, you can even look at, there's others, the gold, I think that's the gold tip that, it's not even at 0.25 of standard deviation. So yeah, it's Dorch, do you have anything to say about?
Well, actually, we need to. A lot of people need to understand
0 standard deviation.
Well, actually, it's not that impossible. It's like when people load, I think, like long-range shooters. When you put everything into consideration and you use every single measure to do what you have, the measurable standard deviation, just like when you load a 1,700-yard shot load, if you're using the basic 22 shot load compared to your 1,700-yard load, you're using that measurement on the 1,700-yard load, the standard deviation is indeed 0. You haven't dig deep enough yet because everything is taken in consideration. I mean, it's like ball bearings. You start with ABAC 7. What's the tolerance? If you use ABAC 1 as measurement, answer is there's no tolerance. It's perfect. That's exactly what it is. It's how deep you want to go into measurement. I mean, just like, one of the funniest thing I heard is when I was listening to the English Museum of Science when they was measuring, then they got an old English first World War I tank. You know what the difference between that V10 cylinder on the cylinder head is?
No.
They have 8-pound difference from the lightest to the heaviest cylinder head. You know what is the current Formula One cylinder head variation? Less than 1/4 of a grain.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, you are talking a freaking tank with the lowest and heaviest piston. You mean that thing that go up and down? They're
Mhm.
8-pound difference. Can you believe that? What would you think when you're sitting there would feel like? Every time that cylinder fire, the whole tank's gonna shake. No, that's exciting. It depends on what are you measuring? And what instrument are you measuring? I mean, are you going to use something like a grain weight when you measure cylinders? The guys in Formula One is indeed using grain, and they're going quarter grains. But back then in World War One, if they get a cylinder out, they can fit inside it. It's using it. Nobody's caring.
The thing that impresses me is, like, I know the process to build a Concept One arrow, and for you to get zero when you have things like the amount of glue that you have to use in it, like the two-part epoxy. I mean, you're basically perfect in the amount of glue you're using. Like it's not even, a drop of glue difference between them. So my hat is tipped to you, taken off to you, Dorge, for building those. I mean, the Concept 2.0s are mine, and I'm at just probably about 0.3% standard deviation. So I've still got a little bit of learning to do. Not much, but a little bit. Of course, I did the other two that are even closer, but
well, just like everybody have their standard and where they have their measurement. But when you like me went through true scientific process of spending times in cyclotron, there's why Republic team, Dr. Tim Ellison told me the Nobel Prize is always in the 8 and 9 digits when you're doing your research. So until you really dig into it, you're not going to find it.
You have any questions or anything, Cameron?
No, I think you guys covered it well. Let's move on to the third and final graph here.
Yes, this is kind of I hate to say it, but this is my favorite graph. Okay. What this is doing is it's showing the standard method of building an arrow. Okay. The way it's been done for hundreds of years, and the scientific arrow process. I mean, that's a huge difference. You're talking 2.45 standard deviation for the standard way, and what's like 0.88 standard deviation using the scientific arrow process. That in alone should have every dealer on the planet calling or texting or emailing one of the three of us about how they can do this process. You're doing a disservice to yourself and your customers by having not much of a variance. I know, it'll take, maybe 10 or 15 minutes longer to do, to build a dozen arrows that way. But it's well worth it. You'll have much happier clients. And, that's the name of the game is to make your people happy, and have them enjoy shooting their equipment.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly my thoughts too. Like if you're able to look at this graph shooting an arrow that's built by the quote unquote standard method, and you're like really happy with it, there's a better process and there's a better arrow. So if you want to try that, I mean, like you said, there's 3 people here to get a hold of. It's pretty damn impressive.
It is. Yeah, well, we're taking technology and applying it to building arrows now. Just the simple difference of having glue trying to stick plastic to carbon on a 45-degree angle compared to horizontal. it's that in itself makes a huge difference. I remember building arrows the old-fashioned way and having to put that drop of glue on the front of the front of the vein or front of the feather to make it hold. Yeah, everybody, let's get into the new century at least with your building arrow techniques. One other thing, I did not fudge any numbers. While I haven't published any of the Excel spreadsheets, I do have them. If somebody wants them, they can contact me. It's just, to put a 30 or 40 line or 50 line Excel graph with, 11 or 12 or 15 columns of numbers on them. I know Dorge would be in seventh heaven for them, but normal people, this is what normal people want to be able to see. But if you do need the math, go on to, on my homepage, contact us, be my guest. I can get you the numbers. Once you've gone through the website, drop me a line. Let me know what you think of it. Or if you're a manufacturer that wants some of their arrows tested, let me know. I used to have a blog where I was testing, hundreds of different products. We can work something out. Is what I'm saying.
Sure. Yeah, I like it. So leaving off here, part 1 complete, part 2 in the works, coming in October. Really excited to see that. Again, I think that's going to be another interesting test. Phase 3, I'm really interested in too, with different broadheads. So Tony,
And different
thanks.
knocks, not just broadheads, but knocks.
True. Yep.
So
I mean,
sorry.
I'm really looking forward to getting all that information. Man, I'm just like, did you get, I don't know if I can ask this on air or not. If this is an answer that needs to be cut, I'll cut it. But did you get anyone to help sponsor with this? Because you're putting an extreme amount of effort into this.
No, I've done this all myself. I paid for or had these arrows and components in stock. I used to own 2 outdoor stores, one in Michigan and one in Ontario. And that's where all this came from, or I purchased it. I did ask permission from all the companies, and their main thing was, go ahead, just make sure people know that you're not affiliated with us, you're not on our pro staff. Even like with Dorge, I'm not on his pro staff or shooting staff or anything like that. But I did this independently. Maybe if there's some manufacturers that want to advertise on the website, that would be cool. I'd love it if the manufacturers that are involved in this would put a link from their website to mine for people. That would be really nice. But no, I've done this all myself.
Well, I commend you for the effort that you've put into it. It's really intriguing stuff. It's really interesting, and hopefully it helps some people out. Hopefully get some people interested in the scientific method. Do you have any concluding thoughts here, Dorge?
Well, I want to point out, you said that when Tony called me this and he said, Dorge, there's a lot of equipment that need to be done. I want to point out most of the equipment for measuring is mine. So first of all, I can't fetch those equipment. So I think that will be about as much as I can contribute without deviating, without contaminating the result. I would say that's the best way I can do. Because Mhm.
Dorge wasn't even around when I was shooting. Okay. He said, okay, I have a lab radar. What do you need to make it work? And well, that took a few months because the microphone, cordless microphone that I was using while I was videotaping, it was interfering with the frequency. But yeah, Dorge was not around when I was doing the testing. This is the first time he's seen any results. He doesn't have copies of any of the graphs or any like the the Excel spreadsheets. I tried, as he said, we tried not to contaminate it. I can't afford to buy a lab radar myself. I mean, I'm disability retired, so my $1,000 a month won't go very far to buy the lab radar and things like that. So I do thank you, Dorge, for loaning me the
No, actually, you see, I got lucky in my life because I got people like when I was never even contemplating to buying a say high speed camera. Rod White is the one who advised me to say, if you want to see stuff, that's the way. And then I remember one of my very good friends called me, hey, Dorge, you want to show how good your arrow is? Get a lab radar. But then I said, when do you have time to do all this? Then when Tony was telling me he was going to do something like this, I said, great, you do this. Well, I just want to, the last thought is that I want to make sure people understand when Tony was describing a scientific process, it's a set of procedures that I believe is what needed to put arrow together with the current set of equipment. The fact is that I built most of the equipment is not that it was absolutely necessary because I can't find anything that will work. So I designed and built and patterned all of them. That's pretty much what the process is. All right, I think that's all the thought I have for the day.
Tony, any concluding thoughts?
No, not really. Like I said, I'm about 75% done part 2. So hopefully, I'm going to be taking a couple of weeks off to do some deer hunting, and then I'll get back to it. But I'll let you and your listeners know when it's ready. Part 3 will have to depend on the weather because if we're getting into winter weather up here in Canada, sometimes it gets pretty difficult to do some shooting. So that might not be until the spring.
Well, that sounds good to me. Again, thank you. Good luck hunting. Dorge, getting ready to
Yes,
get
sir.
hunting. Good luck to you. And
yes, I'm already. I even got my tags.
Ohio season opens up in 2 days. It opens up Saturday.
Really?
So, yep.
Oh, you guys open
Good luck.
that early? We open October 1st.
Yep, we open up here Saturday, so we're gonna be hitting it hard here soon.
All right, great.
All right, guys, thank you.